Just to say a huge thank you for taking your time on a Saturday evening uh, to be here, to be part of a biodynamic farmers workshop. It seems it's a very surreal, but it's a really honor to be speaking to you guys and to chat to you about. So this is going to be an introduction to biodynamics. So we'll keep it quite simple. I think there's a lot of people here that want to just know the basics and maybe even get an idea of how to implement and begin biodynamic agriculture on their farm or change their principles a little bit. So I won't be delving too much into kind of the esoterics behind it, but it'll be more of a practical, how do we do it from a very beginner's point of view. And I would like to kick this off with a beautiful poem that was written by Rudolf Steiner, which has so much relevance to the way we farm, relevance to man's current situation, where man is in his evolution, and explains just a lot about where we are and how our relationship is to the earth and to the planets and to the stars and indeed to the spiritual world, right? And it starts like this: the stars spake once to man. It is world destiny that they are silent now. To be aware of the silence can become pain for earthly man. But in the deepening silence, there grows and ripens what man speaks to the stars. To be aware of the speaking can become strength for spirit man. So, just quick in a nutshell, what is being outlined here is that in man's evolution we have in a sense become cut off from the stars, and we've become quite hardened materialistic beings, and we somehow have to find our way back to a spiritual impulse. And so this idea that we sit quiet and we listen and we turn our gaze back into the cosmos so that we can once again connect in a spiritual way, together with our material being to the cosmos. Beautiful verse, and I think it's so relevant for us in our evolution today. Okay, the how biodynamic agriculture comes to be. So it comes about from an amazing man, a remarkable man who lived around about the 1900s, and he gifted to the farmers at that time, the which one might call them organic farmers at that time, a series of 8 agricultural lectures. And he gave it to the farmers because they actually asked him. They approached him and they realized that their soils weren't as vital as they had been in previous times. Their crops didn't seem to have the same vitality, and the same fertility. And they approached Rudolf and said, "Well, what can we do? What insight do you have to help us to farm better?" And so Rudolf Steiner in 1924 gave this series of agricultural lectures, and he gave it in with this book. I don't know if you can see, and of course now everything's blurred. Maybe if I stand behind, if everyone can see that. This is the agriculture course. Um, it's a translation, so it was given in German. So this is a translation which is available, and you can get it through the Biodynamic Association, but anyone can take it and then just read it. And what it outlines quite nicely. I mean, it is difficult to read, but it outlines quite nicely a spiritualized form of agriculture. And it looks what kind of one of the core principles is to look at your farm, not just as a productive unit, not just as this factory that is producing tonnage and volume to feed people, but it is looking at your farm as a spiritual organism or as an organism, something that is alive and that is living. Um, And if you turn your gaze away from a farm that is just a productive unit or a factory that is just there to produce, and I put inputs in and out, I get this production. If you turn your gaze away from that and look at it as an organism, as a living being, you kind of these words come to mind. Things like self-sustainability and self-sufficiency, right? Um, that's what kind of comes to mind. And then organic and trying to recycle and start and trying to keep things in-house and make things work within this organism. And that's kind of the principle that Steiner, I think, from my perspective, the message that he was trying to bring across in these lectures is to look at your farm as a organism, as a living entity that has a spiritual connection with the cosmos. So how does that work, right? What elements can we look at there and in this that would make sense and make that kind of identify this as a spiritual entity? So if one looks, for example, at the soil, so farmers today, there's a lovely conversation I had with a conventional farmer a while ago who said to me that he doesn't need he doesn't need good soil. He just needs soil because he can just put all the elements in he needs to support plant life. But a biodynamic farmer looks at that very differently. Soil is like our skin. It is this mediating organ between the cosmic influences and what is happening in the ground. And the idea there is that it mediates like a membrane, right? It facilitates this breathing of the cosmic world into the earth and then up into your plant life. So if you now take that gaze and you look at your farm and your soil as this delicate membrane, you start to look at your farm a little bit differently. Then if you take your gaze a little bit further and you look at the microorganisms that are working in soil, and you compare them something to like your digestive processes, you start to realize that through the composting processes, through the biodynamic preparations that you put into your soil, you increase this kind of this biome, this gut biome. And we all know, I think everyone knows, that with a healthy gut, you have a healthy constitution. So if you can somehow understand and take your gaze away from a farm just as a productive unit and this intense inputs to supporting plant life, and change your gaze to trying to create just healthy soil, you then start to work with your plant life on your farm in a very different way. So as biodynamic farmers, what one is always trying to do is to try to keep your soil as healthy as possible. And that is done through application of the preparations and application of the biodynamic compost to keep these microorganisms alive and going, that then sustains plant life. And then somehow, if you go on that journey, you come away from this environment where you are just driving inputs into your soil, and you are now looking at a more internal system. So how do I produce my own compost? But that is already a step too far. So one would say is, how do I produce compost that can support my soil and build my soil fauna, soil life? And then you can take it a step further and say, well, how do I build my own compost to support my soil and bring diversity in my soil to support plant life? So then we can take a step further and we can look at our farm not just as the soil, as this delicate membrane that is there, and your soil as this gut or this microbial life that is working, this digestive process. But one can then look at the crops and your flora. And if you just take your gaze away from the idea that plants are just there to grow produce and you harvest the produce and you sell it, but understand them as maybe a sort of a sensitive organ, something similar to that of your respiratory system. So if you look at your plants, if you look at trees, shrubs, whatever, you see this as a respiratory as a respiratory sensory organism. Kind of this idea that that the plants are reaching up into the heavens and pulling in from the heavens, breathing in from the heavens up into their constitution, as it were. So plants, of course, reach up and they capture sunlight, and they take quite literally sunlight and they turn that into matter through their whole system. And there's this lovely metabolic process that happens there. And then finally, so then to take it a step further, so now we're not looking just at the plant life, that is your kind of your respiratory system, but we're now also looking at how do we bring about this movement on the farm, like a real metabolic movement on the farm. Well, we can look at it. If we look in Mother Nature, I mean, what happens in Mother Nature is you have animals, which are the most amazing things. Next to plant life and the mineral world, you have animals. And if you visit any biodynamic farm in the world, you'll see that every biodynamic farm has an animal of some sort, particularly the cow. Because of course the cow does the most amazing thing. She's quite easy to handle. She's domesticatable, so you can move her through whatever crops you have or onto the pastures and the fields. But what she does is remarkable. She will eat from a patch of grass or of soil, and she will digest that through the most amazing processes within and excrete exactly what that soil needs to keep it fertile. So there is this inherent wisdom that exists between soil life and animal life and plant life, right? So how do we work with that on a farm, and what is that? What is going on there? So if you now take a step away again as a conventional farmer who would, I mean, and I feel for the conventional farmers is looking at I mean, we are driven, motivated by money, right? By the financial sphere. And so what we tend to do is we tend to see the animal as just a commodity, and we then do feedlots and we try to boost production there. But from a biodynamic perspective, the idea is to just take a step away from that and try to understand the role of the animal on your farming organism. And that role is quite a metabolic thing, right? So the animals are there to graze on the fields, and they excrete and they keep the soil life healthy. So they, in a sense, really complement this respiratory act that the plant life has on the farming organism, but they take it a step further. They actually build and continue the vitality of plant life on the farming organism. And that is just the most amazing, absolutely most amazing thing you could ever witness as a farmer. So typically what a biodynamic farmer would do is he'd have a herd of cattle and he'd have pasture lands, and he would allow the cattle to graze, and then you have this very, very rich manure which you then collect, and from that you can make compost with. And so that compost then becomes builds your soil fertility, builds your soil, keeps the microorganisms alive in your farm and builds them, makes your humus content, builds your humus content. And what you're now doing is you're starting to build a biodynamic farming organism. So you're starting to, and not just build a farming organism, but you're starting to build a living organism, which is what every biodynamic farmer really set out to try to do, is to develop this beautiful organism that can exist, with all the organs in place, that it can exist on its own. So you create this kind of this independence within this organism. so that we don't have to bring in external organs to support it, but it has in itself, like your body, it has all the organs to function as an entity on its own. That's what you're trying to do on a biodynamic farm. Then finally, and I must add this because it is a very important point, is then we take one step further and we then look at the role of the farmer. So if you've managed to build the soil up, you've managed to bring in your plant life, and you see your plant life as your respiratory system and your sensory organs, and you involve animals onto your farming organism, you then start to develop a threefold organism. And we can take that a step further because now we need to understand the role of man. And man sits on that farming organism as a very crucial role. He's there to bring these systems together, to make them work, to observe, to understand. But he brings about something which is very special, and he brings about the ego forces. Now, something which is quite special, and we know this in the biodynamic wine world. I'm a viticulturist, a biodynamic viticulturist. So if you taste wines from specific regions, from specific farms, you know exactly that they come from that farm because there is a certain quality that is captured in that wine, in that environment from that farm. So what is going on there? If we try to understand that, what is happening is it's this influence of the man, right? It's influence of the farmer. So the farmer brings about these, we would call them the ego forces. And you can actually taste that in the crops. So very specifically, you'll know from if you're tasting certain produce, you'll know that this comes from a particular farm. Specific tomatoes come from a specific farm, and they carry this beautiful quality. They've got this particular flavor. They have this particular flavor profile or this particular aroma. They come from specific farms, and that is now the influence of this ego constitution, or a direct influence from the farmer. And there you really come away, if you kind of go on this journey, you come away from this environment where you are focused on a production line driven by this financial sphere to try to produce as much as you can. And you come away from that to a more threefold, fourfold, holistic living entity that you're trying to build. And of course, the finances have to play a big part in that. We know that in modern day, we have to be financially viable. Otherwise, we won't be farming for much longer. Especially in South Africa, I find that it is probably one of the most important topics is the financial sphere. How does a biodynamic farmer balance that in today's economic climate? And I think maybe there should be a workshop on that, Marale Sizo, in times to come. All right. Does anyone have any questions with that so far? Is everyone happy with that? Does that make sense? Are you all happy and comfortable with that? Fantastic. All right. Now, what I want to discuss with you, and I think it's a beautiful question, which Marlek posted for me, was what are the seasonal rhythms and their importance in biodynamic agriculture? So this is a lovely question, and I will touch a little bit on the importance of understanding this and how one builds this resilience on your farm. Okay, if you're a conventional farmer, or if you're just a modern farmer, the idea here is we're not so much involved with the seasons, right? Because there's a lot of manipulation there. We can force, if I speak particularly about vineyards, but we can force dormancy, or we can force the vines out of dormancy with a number of chemical products. So we can really manipulate nature in many ways. And I think that's the real drive from modern science, which has its place. But in biodynamic agriculture, the idea here, and if I can continue from what we've just discussed now with creating this farming organism, a living entity, the the seasonal rhythms play a huge part in looking after and sustaining your life on your farm. So if we look at, let's start with the summer months. If one looks at the summer months, and one just takes your gaze away from a micro perspective, but from a macro perspective, what is happening there is a planetary breathing. The earth is breathing outward. And you can see that in the growth of your plant life. So everything, all the forces are happening above the earth. So there's a tremendous amount. If you are working with vegetables or fruit or viticulturally speaking, there's a tremendous amount of growth above the earth. The leaves are green, they build these amazing canopies. Your vegetables are growing like crazy. If you have tomato plants, cucumber plants, they grow like hell. You trellis them, you train them, you get them on their systems. So what's happening there is the earth is breathing out. And this happens in the summer. So this invites all kinds of activity. This invites farming activity. This invites you to sow your seeds, to plant your seedlings, to produce, to apply things like one of the preparations, which I'll touch on just now, which is the 501, to apply 501, which supports the fertility processes and builds canopies, or works on the leaf, on the constitution of the plant to build strength and vitality, as well as these levitation forces. So all your activity is above the earth. This happens in the summertime. Then what we get is we have the winter, which is now a breathing in. So the earth is quite literally, she's breathing in. And what happens then, and you can see that, is autumn comes and the leaves turn yellow and they fall to the earth. And your trees and your plants, they go into dormancy. And this is a time where the earth becomes alive. And it's a time where the reflection of the entire summer month is now concentrated within the earth, like when we go to sleep at night. It's this really breathing in, and this activity above the earth suddenly descends below the earth. And this invites a time for a farmer to really focus on building soil life. So this is a time where the biodynamic farmer will apply things like 500 and compost, make compost to apply to the soil, just to build your soil life, your soil structure. And of course, 500 we know is there to build your humus content, to encourage root development, to build soil structure. That is what happens in winter. This is kind of the purpose of the seasons, right? So then you can take that even further. So what I've discussed there, which is quite important, is you have these rhythms that are happening, these seasonal rhythms, this spring into summer, and then you have this autumn into winter. But there are, one might say, that these very different rhythms or micro rhythms, which I want to also outline here. And this is also particular rhythms that the biodynamic farmer will follow. And this would include things like the rhythms of the moon. So we know that plant life or plant growth or fertility is guided and governed by the process of the moon. So what we try to do is we try to align our farming operation with the processes of the moon, right? So, for example, when the moon is, and bear with me here, 'cause I will explain it just now, but when the moon is working through the Virgo or Taurus or Capricorn, these are times where your best times to sow are things like are root crops, things like carrots or beetroots or potatoes not a root crop, or onions or sweet potatoes. And this is of one of the four elements. This is the earth sign. Alternatively, if the moon is passing through Scorpio or Pisces or Cancer, this is a time where you then tend to leafy greens like spinach or lettuce. And this is a time where there is tremendous water influence on the water element on the earth. And then the time where the moon is passing through Gemini or Libra or Aquarius, these are times where we want to work with the air element or the light element or the flowering on the earth. And so you'll work with things like your broccolis, your flowers. Joe, you do flowers, so it's a good time to do flowering. or seeds or anything like that. And then, of course, when the moon then passes through Leo, I don't know if there are any Leos or Aries here. I'm an Aries or Sagittarius. So this is particularly the warmth element or the fruit element. This is a very good time to harvest things like grapes. It's the best time to taste wine as well. Harvesting grains or harvesting tomatoes or something like that. So there are these rhythms that exist as well. So outside of the seasonal rhythms, there are these internal, more immediate, more intimate rhythms that exist, and that's got to do with the moon. And this is something that Maria Toon outlined. I don't know if anyone knows Maria Toon, but she put together the biodynamic calendar. And in the biodynamic calendar, all of this is mapped quite nicely. So it makes it so much easier for you. What I've just explained now, it's very easy for you to understand, and then apply that onto your farm. Just one more thing I would like to add is something that's quite fascinating, which we did as an exercise the other day, was to plant our cover crop seeds, our grains, at full moon. And the germination and just observe the germination time. And if you do that, you will see that your germination time is very quick. So you have a very quick germination time. And of course, we know the moon's influence, which is at full moon, has everything to do with fertility. And so planting towards growing to the full moon is always a good time to sow seeds. Now, why is it important to, okay, and then just lastly, just to mention which I will explain to you now, is the preparations. So there's another rhythm that we must follow. And so when we now turn our gaze to the biodynamic preparations and we want to apply the biodynamic preparations, we always apply 501, which is the horn silica preparation, before the first light. So early in the morning, before the sun rises, always before first light. And that, of course, is all to do with fertility in your plants. So you want to spray that at first light, and that supports your levitation forces. It supports your structural forces. It supports your growth forces. So 501 would always be applied first thing in the morning. That's one rhythm. The second rhythm, which is your 500, you always want to apply in the afternoon. And that's because the earth is now breathing in. So the earth is breathing out in the morning. That's why we spray 501 in the early morning. And the earth is breathing in the late afternoon. And that's the time to apply our preparation 500, our cow horn preparation. So why does one want to stick to these rhythms? Caesar, I see you've got your hand up. Do you want to go for it?
Please, I just want to know, what are these biodynamic preparations? What is that you're talking about?
Okay, bear with me. That will be the last point I'm going to address. So just bear with me, and then I'll explain all of that to you now. All right. Okay. That's actually my next point, Caesar. Thank you. All right. Why does one want to follow these rhythms? There are thousands of reasons, but there are three very important reasons that I want to just outline here. The first one is when you are working with the preparations, when you are working with these rhythms, the moon influences, the constellations, how the planets work on soil life. If you can get these rhythms right, you have good results. You have produce that when you harvest sits and has good shelf life. You have produce that holds longer. You have produce that tastes good and has good vitality. And so that's one good reason why to follow these rhythms. Another very good reason for following this is I've got here structural integrity. If you can follow these rhythms, and that's a very, very good point, is you can follow these rhythms, your plants and your crops seem to be a lot more resilient to pests, to disease, to illness. If you follow these rhythms, you are working with the innate nature, this incredible wisdom that sits in nature herself. And so you build resilience in that, right? Into your crops. And it makes farming so much easier. It makes your farming, your life so much easier and less reliant on external inputs external sprays, fertilizer, and so on. But it really encourages you to turn your gaze away from a really high input environment into an environment where you're creating this self-sustained, self-sufficient farming organism. And the last and the most important reason, which I could think of, which we saw in these storms that we had recently. So as I explained, I mean, I I drive through a few farms when I get to work in the morning, and I see on conventional farms the amount of damage that the rains that fell recently in the storms had on them. What is that damage? I mean, that damage you see, it's serious soil erosion. It's serious damage to crops. Entire rows of vineyards have been blown over and snapped in half because of these incredible winds. Soil that's washed away. Um, but if you are working in a kind of a spiritual way, which I've outlined here, and a way that is in trying to build and establish a farming organism, the effects of, and I'll name it climate change, if that's okay, I'll call it climate change. The effects of climate change are in a sense mitigated. Not entirely, but to a large degree. The amount of erosion that one has on a biodynamic farm is very little, if at all. Um, the amount of, I mean, your crops are just so much more resilient. They are stronger. They are healthier, and almost, and I see this all the time, is that my vines or my crops just seem to know when there is a storm coming, and they seem to be able to just adjust themselves and strengthen themselves against that. And I had this lovely discussion with Johan Reineke the other day. It was exactly this: is I mean, the storm was hectic. We had the Weather Bureau predicted something like 160 mils. We had well over 200 mils. Now, in 3 days. Now, that's a lot of water. That's just, I mean, it's just, I can't explain to you, but when you're standing outside in the rain, trying to keep your contours open, you just cannot believe the amount of water that's falling. And but somehow your farm has got this resilience built into it. It's got this resistance, or this strength and this integrity built into her or him, that is able to kind of compensate for these incredible amounts, these incredible volumes of rain or water, or this intense wind. I mean, so many trees were blown over, and our trees, the young, I've planted a forest, indigenous forest on Reineke, and they none of them broke. They all seemed to handle just fine. Even though, I mean, fences were blown over, and on neighboring farms, I told you, whole rows of vineyards were wiped out. So it's a really good reason and a really good idea to think about this implementing a more greener, more softer, organic or biodynamic approach, because ultimately a farmer doesn't want to see this erosion or this devastation on his farm. He wants a healthy farm, right? But I'm sure, and of course, there's millions of other reasons why to go biodynamic. But that for me was quite a highlight. All right, now to Caesar's question, which is about the preparations, the binary preparations. Are there any burning questions up to now? Everyone happy and comfortable with all of that? Good. The biodynamic preparations. In biodynamic agriculture, we have Rudolf Steiner gave us a number of preparations. These preparations are like remedies, or medicines, or sort of microbial dosages that can help to strengthen the vitality of your farm, strengthen and improve the fertility and sustain that fertility and keep it alive, right? And or to go a bit more esoteric, keep it connected to the cosmic world. So we have three field spray preparations. The first field spray, which is a very common one, is called preparation 500, or cow horn preparation. It is cow manure from a lactating cow that is inserted or installed or put into a cow horn and buried in the winter time. That preparation is then lifted up in the summer or late spring in South Africa, late spring, and what has happened in the cow horn is this beautiful, the most amazing transformation of this cow manure into almost a humus substance, just a rich, dark, rich, earthy, beautiful, healthy substance. And what we do with that preparation is we take about 100 grams or 120 grams of that and we dynamize that in 40 liters of water and we apply that per hectare. Dynamizing is this process of stirring warm water in one direction and then breaking that vortex. Once that vortex is created, breaking that vortex, creating chaos, and then back into another vortex. And you're stirring it like that for an hour. You apply that to your soil, directly to your soil as droplets, always in the afternoon. Very important because this is the breathing in of the earth. Then there is another preparation. It's called 501 or horn silica preparation. Sorry, just to quickly go back. So preparation 500, its entire being is there to develop humus content in your soil, to build soil structure, and to develop root development for root development and root health. It's typically applied in the autumn season and the winter period, and maybe even in spring, because this is a time of inner reflection of the earth here in South Africa. But also because winter is our wetter month. So summer is very dry, so it doesn't make sense to apply it then, but definitely in the autumn and the winter when the earth's processes are going into the earth, concentrating in the earth. Then we have another preparation called 501. Now this 501 is horn silica. It is quartz crystal, which is crushed into a powder, also put into a cow horn and buried in the summer months. This preparation is then lifted out in the sort of the autumn or the winter time, and we dynamize 4 grams in 40 liters of water and apply that per hectare. So again, the dynamizing process is the stirring, taking warm water and stirring it in one direction, creating a vortex, and as soon as that vortex is created, you break that vortex and turn it in the opposite direction. So it's this chaos into order for an hour. This is applied as a folio feed or folio spray, a very fine mist, early in the morning to your crops. I apply this on my vines during flowering time. Because as I understand it, 501, and as I've seen it, 501 is there for the fertility processes. It's there to build fertility. And if you do that during flowering, what you will find is you will find that you have when your flowers are fertilized, they become berries, and you just get this better Rosie, what do you call it? It goes through to it develops a berry. Sorry, I've not forgotten the word.
Okay, yeah, not Deerslaan. We would
Deerslaan.
call it, that's veraison, where it goes
Yeah,
from green to black, but where it goes from flower to forming the pea berry.
Kapifal is a kapifal, but anyway, where it goes from flowering to the actual fruit, to developing the fruit, you have just better formation and more flowers take, right? They actually become berries. So you just have better developed bunches. You have healthier bunches that are more resilient to, particularly to oidium or a downy mildew. And you have better ripening. So you have this veraison. You have a much more even veraison during veraison, and you have just better quality out of your bunches. And that is why I apply 501 during flowering. And I think that, and the same thing, I do the same thing for my pumpkins. I apply 501 during flowering because it supports the fertility processes. And I find that I get better in my pumpkins themselves. I get seeds that form much better and much healthier, which I can then use for the next season. And then, of course, those seeds are just so fertile that when you plant them, they take. and you have this procession, this ongoing procession of health, which continues. So that's 501. Then there is another preparation, which I will mention now. It's not a biodynamic preparation, but it is a very rich compost that Maria Thun envisioned or brought about. And it's called cow pat pit. It is barrel compost. It's a very rich compost. So the idea here is one takes 250 grams of crushed eggshells with 250 grams of volcanic rock powderized, with about a wheelbarrow full of good quality cow manure. You take all of these ingredients and you mix them, and you mix them for about 10 to 15 minutes, and you put this in a pit in the earth. So a pit that is lined with a barrel with wood or lined with bricks, never with cement. And you then put 3 sets of compost preparations into that mix. You let that sit for 3 months. You turn it once in that 3-month period. You let that sit, and what comes out of that is a very, very rich compost, which you can then dynamize in the same way as we do 500. So you do about 100 to 150 grams per hectare in 40 liters of water, and you spray that as a soil spray, in droplet form on your hectare. So that's a lovely preparation or lovely compost, a very rich composting process which you can use to help boost the fertility in your soil. It assists with bringing the pH down, which is quite nice, especially if you have acidic soil. In viticulture, we really struggle with that. So it helps just to bring that pH and regulate that pH properly. It helps build your microorganisms in your soil. It develops humus nicely, brings good microorganisms, and it just brings vitality to your soil. So those 3 are what are called the biodynamic field sprays. Then we have a set of preparations. We've named them 502 to 507. And these sprays are what are known as the biodynamic compost preparations. And they are inserted into a biodynamic compost heap as soon as the compost heap is made. Now, we won't go into detail about how to make a compost here. I think we are going to have a workshop later on in the year on how to make compost. But just quickly, so the idea here is you build a compost heap through layering. So you collect greens, carbon material, and you collect cow manure, good quality cow manure, and you layer these. So you build your compost heap in layering. So you have a layer of fresh greens or carbon material, then a thin layer of cow manure, then another layer of carbon material, then a thin layer of cow manure, and so you build up until the height that you want. Once that heap has been built, you then insert the biodynamic compost preparations into that heap as soon as the compost heap has been built. That for me is the most important thing. Because what happens then is you have this amazing heat and temperature that builds up in your compost heap, and this incredible process, this wild process that happens within the compost heap, which quite literally is turning this carbon matter into humus. And it's the most amazing thing to witness. And the biodynamic compost preparations have quite a particular function there. And their functions are, amongst many things, so they're like a medicine in the compost pile. They're there to regulate the breaking down of organic matter and to ensure, and this is very special and very important, to ensure that elements like nitrogen and calcium are properly broken down and integrated into this manure pile, so that when you apply the manure to your plant life, the plant life can take it up in the right way. Does that make sense? Everybody happy with that? Okay, I'll quickly go through the preparations just for interest's sake, because it's so incredible what the preparations are. So yarrow, so 502 is yarrow, that's our first compost preparation, and its processes are to regulate are involved in potassium and sulfur, and it keeps the plant supple. You have 503, which is our chamomile flowers. This stabilizes nitrogen and calcium, promotes healthy growth. You have 504, which is stinging nettle. which improves, I love this, which improves the soil intelligence. Now that's important. In biodynamics, there's always this esoteric thing, right? But it improves the soil intelligence of iron and manganese, the balance of the iron and the manganese. Then you have oak bark, which is just also just an amazing preparation. If anyone knows that the oak tree has got 77% of the oak tree is calcium. Nowhere in nature is that concentration so high than in the European, I think it's the English oak, which is absolutely astounding. But that is one of our preparations, and it provides the healing properties and calcium, which prevents disease. Calcium, if anyone knows, has the purpose of managing rampant growth. And if you can manage rampant growth in plant life, then you also avoid disease and illness, right? Then you have 506, which is our dandelion preparation, which is also such a beautiful preparation. And it relates to the silicic acid and helps the plant know its environment. It's just absolutely incredible. And then finally, I think this plant is just an absolutely amazing plant, and it's the valerian plant, which is a 507. And 507 is a warmth preparation, and it stimulates the phosphorus and protects from frost, but it somehow also has this a calming effect, this kind of this bringing all of these preparations and this wildness that's going on in this compost, just all of them to relate to each other in the right way. That's 507. All right. There is one last preparation which I will mention just briefly to everyone, and that is it's preparation 508. This is equisetum. Now, if anyone knows the equisetum plant, it is just also an absolute marvel of nature. The fact that it is pure crystalline, the leaves, the little what do you call them? The shoots are crystalline. So if you take them and you can actually break them, there's silica inside of them. So this plant somehow has got this formation of silica, this very structured element inside of it, and it grows in high quantity. And the idea with equisetum, which is quite nice, is you cut the equisetum plant and you boil it and you make a tea out of it, and you can apply it to your crops as a fungal repellent, so to speak, to strengthen your plant's structural, so that you don't get as much disease. Good. I think what we'll do later on when we build compost, there will be more description of the preparations and just a more practical idea of how to insert the preparations into compost heap, and how they work. All right. So a question that we get all the time, which is a very good question, and something that we are struggling with in South Africa is how do we. So given all of this, we know what we want to try to achieve in building a farming organism. We now understand the rhythms of nature and how the planets work and kind of how their influences on plant life and soil life and animal life and mankind. We now have a kind of an idea of the preparations, but how does one start as a farmer? How do you start tending towards a kind of a biodynamic, maybe even an organic approach? And that is a very difficult question to answer because for many years I've been trying to get farmers to go a kind of a softer approach, especially in the viticulture industry, to go to just to get away from the chemicals. But somehow, and one must realize that it is very difficult to apply this to an established farming operation and to expect good results out of that. You just won't. That is a reality. So these things I always find need to be handled very carefully, and there needs to be a certain guidance and perhaps even a mentorship to support you in your kind of this transition period. But I have got kind of an outline which I can help you with. So the first thing to do, if you're a farmer and you are wanting to go a bit softer in your approach, and you're wanting to go to a more organic approach, my suggestion would be to just begin observing your farm. take many afternoons and walk your land and try to understand the lay of the land. Try to understand what is going on your farm. Where is the wetland situated? Where are your trees? Where are your pasture lands, or where are your fallow fields? How do they look? What is your land quite steep? Is it quite flat? Where's the water running? How does that look like? So just try to get an idea of these different elements of your farm. Where are the windbreaks? Where are your boundaries? Where is your natural vegetation? So your native vegetation, where is that? Where does that sit? So in the Western Cape, we always look at our fynbos. Where is that? Is it on the higher slopes? Is it in the lower areas? And just try to get a feeling for what's going on in your farm. Walk your land and try to map out that ecosystem. Then my suggestion would be to try to build, try to establish a composting system. Because I think the ultimate thing is, and I think every farmer gets this, is if you have healthy soil, you have healthy crops. I think every farmer knows that. So how do we go about trying to get that right? And I think my suggestion there would be to start with a composting program. Start taking fresh leaves and wood chips and mulching and try to build a compost pile. And if you have cows, use the cow manure in that to make compost with. If you don't, try to source cow manure somewhere. I think that would be quite special. And there's an opportunity for relationship building with your other farmers. Try to source other fresh cow manure and start building compost heaps and see how that materializes. And try to do it in a very rhythmic way. So always in autumn, you start to, throughout the year, you collect manure, collect fresh material, which you store. And then in the autumn period, you now start to build your compost heaps. And then in the winter period, you allow them to mature. And then just before the end of winter, you put that compost out on your pastures or your fields or your crops, and really try to get that rhythm right. And then if you can take that a step further, try to even put the preparations that I've mentioned here, the compost preparations 502 to 507, try to put them into your compost heaps and see what the outcomes are. Try to build a relationship with your compost heaps, right? I think that could be quite special. And then take your compost and apply it to your soil and try to observe what effect does the compost have on your plant life. And one effect I will just quickly mention, which is just the most amazing thing, is if I apply my compost to my vineyards, the most amazing color of green, as if I've applied a hell of a lot of nitrogen to my vines, but this beautiful, rich green, balanced growth in my vines comes about. And that's for me an immediate observation that I know that my compost is good quality and it's working. So that's kind of these indicators that you can look at to help you. Once you've got a good composting rhythm going, another suggestion would be to look at applying the preparations 500 and the preparation cowpepit that I mentioned. 500, there's a very lovely question in the biodynamic world, or even in the conventional world, is if a conventional farmer has worked on soil and that soil is now depleted, it doesn't seem to sustain plant life, can we actually revitalize that soil? And my answer is absolutely. Biodynamics has got all the tools it needs to get that right. And one of those tools is applying 500. 500 is the most amazing preparation. It brings so much microorganisms back to your soil to make it living again. It builds your humus, builds your soil structure. It allows root development to happen. It brings back weeds, which is what you need. And you know, plants and soil life, there's a beautiful relationship there. So applying the preparation 500 for me is probably one of the most important things to start off with. And then, of course, try to even apply 501. So that 501 is a complementary preparation. So 500 works below the earth and 501 works above the earth, and these two complement each other in with this beautiful relationship. So see if you can go about applying 500 and 501, which would be a really, really good start. And I think they will come very good results, as well as cowpea pit is also very good preparation to start applying. Then, because we're on this idea of focusing on of soil health, how do we revitalize our soil? Another way would be, and a very easy way to bring about healing to your farm, or to on this kind of this sustainable journey, is to look at cover cropping. And I think cover crops are probably one of the most underestimated crops, or actions or principles, or whatever methods that one can apply to a farm to really, really build your soil health and your humus. On my farming operation, the cover crops are absolutely everything. So I use a combination of legumes and grains. The legumes are there to put nitrogen in the soil, which helps the vines grow in the growing period. The grains are there as a carbon element to build the soil structure. So if you can start to work with cover cropping, just on bare soil, put cover crops down. And I saw a lovely documentary the other day that American farmers are starting to put in cover crop seed onto soil that they would have otherwise just left for an entire season. So what they're now doing is they're putting cover crop seeds down, which is a combination of legumes and grains and grasses, to cover the soil, right? But what that does is, when you work it into the soil, back into the soil, you start to really just bring about health and vitality back to your soil. So that's a very good tool that you can apply to help you on this organic journey. Then, and as I mentioned, which is quite important, is try to look at some kind of mentorship. Find someone out there who is a good organic farmer, or a good biodynamic farmer, who can then support you on this journey, because it's very, very difficult if you're alone doing this on your own. And I speak for a lot of biodynamic South African farmers who really want to go this kind of a softer, more organic approach, but find themselves, when they go on this journey, completely alone. There's no one to help them when their crops are failing, or when they're just not getting the tonnages they need to. They just don't know who to ask. So it's very important to try to surround yourself with people who have the wisdom and the knowledge, and who have done this before. I think that's also a very, very good idea. Or even join a community. So in South Africa, and I'm sure you all know Wendy Lilje, she brought about this Demeter PGS system, which is a very good system, which is a participatory guarantee system, and it supports farmers who are on this journey to going organic. And I think if you can join a PGS group, this could really help you to just expand on your knowledge and support you in your transition to an organic or biodynamic approach. You could also, even if you wanted to, and I think Rosie did this, is to look to an organic certification, because here you have a set of standards that kind of guides you on how to apply, and what the rules and what the rules are. But then also to go to maybe even a biodynamic certification, because that's kind of the next step, third party, to really help you look at the standards and how to implement that on your farm. But I personally, I love community. I think there's so much, man, South African farmers, we have got so much experience, and our conditions are very difficult. And I think South African farmers have really learned how to adapt their farming principles to our extreme conditions. I mean, Caesar, for example, sits on high silica content sand, right? And Rosie, who's the envy of us all, sits in this beautiful loamy soil, granite slope, maybe even very weathered ancient soils, fynbos soil, which is quite acidic. So you have these incredible extremes, and then you come to maybe Reinicke, which has got areas which are heavy clay. So, and we've got really good techniques amongst just us of how to work with clay, how to work with granite, right? How to work in heavy in silica sand soil. and what crops to grow in that, and how to address and remediate and make it work for what we are trying to farm. So there is a tremendous amount of knowledge here, and I think if we can just invest in our community and build our biodynamic community, I think, man, this is going to, yeah, the biodynamic community will really fly. If you have any questions, please give a shout to Bedasa. Write to Bedasa, info@bedasa.org.za. And we can then connect you to someone or answer your question in a good way and just give you the support you need. I think we really are equipped to do that now. If you have any questions, any concerns, any comments you want to make, please give a shout. If you have any questions now, please go for it and ask. Okay, just quickly, I have a lovely book which is called Grasp the Nettle. It's a fantastic book. It's written by Peter Proctor, with lovely illustrations which can help you farm. If you this agriculture course is also another very good book. It is, just be mindful that it is a difficult read, right? It is written, it's lectures by Rudolf Steiner. So the concepts are the concepts are quite far-reaching. But if you can read it 6 or 7 times, you'll maybe, like myself, you'll maybe realize by the 8th time you've just understood something for the first time. So it's a very, very well worth reading. And then this is also a very lovely book. I know a lot of people, we don't have it available, but it's called a Biodynamic Manual. Everyone can see that. A Biodynamic Manual, which is written by Pierre Masson, who has a lot of wisdom and insight in biodynamic agriculture. And this book it is quite plain and simple, has got some very good, actually very good farming techniques that one can apply to helping you just be a successful farmer, right, going forward. Those are the 3 books I recommend just to start with. Okay.
And the calendar. We have a calendar as well that you can purchase. It will help you to track those rhythms that Ishaan was referring to. And if you write to us or contact anybody within the community, it'll be very easy. You'll be pointed into the right direction to get a brand new biodynamic calendar that'll tell you what to do every day throughout the year.
Fantastic.
So
Yes,
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you. This was really lovely and such a good introduction for anyone that's never heard of biodynamic farming before. And for those of us that have, you've done exceptionally well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's thanks to you guys, because you're actually listening and here and being part of this journey. It's not just me, but as all of us as biodynamic farmers that are on a hell of a journey to try to fix what the future is throwing at us. Fantastic. Okay, guys. Yes, just lastly, if you have any comments or any questions, please write to Bedasa. We'll happily help you. Otherwise, Sumaya, thank you. Nikki, thank you. Everyone, thank you. Fabian, boys, thank you. Rochelle, thank you. Guys, have a wonderful Saturday evening. And thank you for spending time with me and with Bedasa. I appreciate it.